Episode 1469 with Adam Perry Lang, who owns APL Steakhouse in Hollywood, has been widely panned by JRE fans as the most boring topic that Joe Rogan ever took a look at. Not that Adam was boring himself, he seems like a great guy, and his hard work ethic and humongous passion really comes off as inspiring. But just because we've been spoiled with aliens, fountains of youth, anti-aging, a coronavirus that can kill us all, a super entertaining political climate, and of course, DMT. So when you start talking for 2 hours about cooking steak, we'd rather take a pass. And now here I decide to do recaps on Rogan episodes, and this is the first one that falls into my lap to start discussing. Gee, thanks. Fate, I guess. Either way, I said I'm going to do this, so at least this will be a good practice round for when people start watching, right? So here goes. This is what happened. Start the clock. So Adam's freaking out about the coronavirus situation. His sit-in restaurant, which is right next door to Pantage's Theater in the Hollywood Vine, had to close, and just like my bad luck having to review this episode, they had to close the night that Hamilton was going to premiere next door to them in the Pantage's Theater, which would have brought in amazing business for the whole block. For now, 90% of the staff has been cut back, and now it's just him and some cooks, 5 staff total. Right now, he's selling at 10 to 15% of what he was doing capacity prior to the pandemic. They're pushing off the rent, he just can't afford it. His GM actually told him, "We're with you. You didn't create the coronavirus. You do what you have to do. We know your heart is in the right place." He's also teaming with his good buddy Jimmy Kimmel, and that every meal they prepare, they donate an additional meal to St. Joseph's Center. Pretty nice. He says he likes Postmate and Grubhub as it expands the market. Then they get into the meat and potatoes of the business. Get it? He specializes in dry-aged steaks. Joe actually had a steak that was dry-aged for a year, and that's what he does. The key to making dry-aged steaks are air velocity, temperature, and humidity. You got to get like a whole mix of that properly. You got to get the proper air velocity, the proper temperature. I don't know what this stuff means. If you're into the details, then that's what this show is for. Basically, he says that when you're on the beach and sweating, but the sweat is able to evaporate so you don't get all gross, that's what he's doing to these meats, basically. Plus, there's a slow dehydration, which concentrates the flavor and changes the amino acids and enzymes in the meat through rigor mortis, making it tender. Sure. And you're either hearing that going, yum, I want that, or completely grossed out. Let me know in the comments. For cooking steak temperatures, he likes 110 for rare, as opposed to many who say that rare cooking should be 120, 125, and he calls that medium rare. He likes to cook it to 105 for a while and let it sit there. He goes, "I call it tempering of the meat, and it starts transmitting the temperature towards the center. And then I put it back in again, and then it will heat up." Joe talks about other restaurants that use log burning or charcoal broiling, but Adam likes his dry aging style where it sits at 35 degrees for months with high humidity so it doesn't dry out right away. And when he cooks it, he likes to use a plancha to cook his steaks, and he cuts it with a saw. Another thing he has is a culture, or a mold, seriously. He calls it a friendly mold, that he's been using for 16 years that he cooks with. He was taught by his heroes in the Bronx. That's where he gets his style from. But each dry aging style also depends on the room it's aging in. His restaurant in Vegas had high ceilings versus the low ceilings happening in his Hollywood one. So the room and the spores circulating give it a different flavor each time. Pretty cool. He and Joe both agree that cooking is like an art, and of course Joe gets into how that's just like MMA and comedy. It's also an art, and you don't really appreciate it until you get into the full aspects of MMA and the full aspects of comedy. You realize where the art is, and you have to always tinker with it. Talking about how this is like an art, Joe relates going to a restaurant in France where they're on the side of a lake and there's like 10 customers and 100 chefs working, and they're creating these things with fillet knives and a grape and like 2 or 3 caviar eggs, and they give it to these people and they're just like in ecstasy. He realizes that just like people don't realize and understand the art form of martial arts, so too you don't understand the art of cooking until you delve into it. Adam says he even knows a fish expert in Tokyo known as the Tokyo Fixer, who knows all the places in the books, off the books, the best tuna producers, etc. Some people like to go to the markets and feel the actual fish before they buy it, these huge tuna tunas. But the real experts, they go to the boats, they know the captains, they know what the sea level is at the time. There's so much cultural pride in having the absolute best fish, which is why they have those auctions that go for $1 million. It's not worth that money. They'll take a loss when they sell the food, but having the absolute best quality fish is a matter of pride. He actually makes his own steak knives for his customers because the way that you cut the steak affects the taste. He charges $950.01 per knife if somebody wants to buy the knife. Why? It's not worth that much, but that's what the felony threshold is in the United States, which means if you steal something worth $50, you don't get charged with a felony. You steal something for $950.01, bam! You're off to the Fed penitentiary. He knows that, and a lot of his customers now know that. One guy he did catch, and he threatened to press charges, and the guy had to bring it back. He was all angry and he went, "Arr!" So think twice before you steal a knife from his restaurant. Go to a different restaurant. He studied blade making to create the perfect blade. He studied, like, he knows the whole art form of blade making, and he's talking about this, and that makes Joe, of course, go, well, I got a samurai sword. You want to see? And then Joe shows him his samurai sword. And the guy's like, whoa. And he's really into it. And he's just saying, like, anyone can make a blade, but the soul of a blade comes through the thermocycle, the heat treatment. There's this whole process that's about aligning the molecular structure in the right type of stack and then hardening of it, or the softening, which might give it more utility. That's what determines what the blade is and what it will be. When he got one of his knives blades made in Japan, the Japanese blade maker actually wanted a picture of him to look at while he was making the blade to capture Adam's essence. It's pretty cool. He laments that pre-Food Network chefs started out as sous chefs and then line chefs, working their way up with passion, and you only did it for the passion because you love making food. But once the Food Network came around, they started making everyone a celebrity so that people would graduate culinary school and then bam, they'd become a chef. He says to be a real chef, you need the hours. He also says that he loves teaching other people. It's very, very huge for him, and it actually makes him better at what he does. Which actually reminds me of what the Babylonian Talmud said in the year 500 when Rabbi Hanina said, I learned much from my teachers. I have learned more from my colleagues than my teachers, but I learned the most from my students than all of them. So, pretty cool. Adam is repeating that. All right, let's keep going. He likes cast iron pans more than any other pans. They're slow to heat up, but many pans that you put the cold steak down on it and that cools the pan, and then it takes a while to heat back up the pan, and then the water underneath the steak stays cold, and then it's not good. Whereas with a cast iron pan, it stays hot, so even when you put the steak on top of it, it doesn't change the temperature. Do I sound like I know what I'm talking about? I don't know what that Searing is a misnomer term. I didn't know that. You want seared tuna, seared steak? No, that means that you're sealing in the flesh from the outside to keep in the juices. But you only do that with live flesh. With steaks, you can only brown it. Yeah. He then goes into the specifics of heating up the collagen, the protein, the juices, exactly how to heat the perfect steak. Basically, he lost me when he turns the collagen into gelatin. He suggests a brisket temperature of 265. He's not a fan of reverse searing. Lean meat, maybe you should brown it and then go slow. So maybe reverse the searing for lean meat. Elk meat, he cooks hot and fast so that he can taste it and savor it. Sous vide cooking, which is a vacuum-sealed cooking in a bag, then cooking it into a very precise temperature in a water bath. He recommends that for shellfish. And then they finally move on. They go into COVID talk. Joe wants to see super fast testing where you can go into a restaurant and they can check right away if you're positive or not before you come in, and then you can have customers again because now, boop, yeah, you're good, come right in. So Joe wants to see something like that, and hopefully we'll get into something like that because then every restaurant can be open all over again. Joe rants that we need to find a way to work around COVID-19 so that we can live our lives. People want to get back out there and we can mitigate all this dying with new emerging drugs, and we should just let people choose. If they want to get out there, they want to take the risk, let them do that. Adam doesn't have a solution. He just doesn't want to see people dying, so he just works at making amazing food that people want and need, and he does what he can to help. The Hollywood Vine area that his restaurant is in just had a $6 billion revitalization of the past decade, and it's been resurging until the virus hit. Remember when Times Square was the dirtiest, scariest place in New York in the 90s, and now it's like Disney? Yeah, that's what they talk about. He does not enjoy eating trout, but what he does love, and he has a humongous passion for this also, he loves fly fishing, and he goes on trips with his friend Jimmy Kimmel. It's the skill, the intuition, the hunt. This all excites him. Jimmy is actually more of a strict dry fly fishing fan than he is. Both of their fishing mentor is Huey Lewis from Huey Lewis in the News. They catch and release. They look down on people who actually keep their hunt. And also Jimmy and Huey chastise him. They give him a hard time for cheating sometimes when he uses a bob to hold up his fly in the water. Not this fly. Oh, flies on that. Joe relates this to how bow hunters look down at rifle hunters. They call them poachers. Either way, though, hunt your own meat if you're worried about the food supply or factory farming, and you should do it ethically. Adam gets back to his steaks because we want to learn more about steaks. Naaman Ranch is who supplies Adam with meat. They're from family farming with no antibiotics or steroids, quality feed, painless cattle transport. So very, very ethical. And they use this method of stressless cattle slaughter that Temple Grandin actually introduced, where she could tell the best way to slaughter a cow so that it doesn't get stressed out right before it gets slaughtered. And that actually affects the quality of the beef. Grass-fed cows won't necessarily taste better if they aren't getting nutrients in those grass. So grain-fed, he says, is like butter. It's even better, except maybe in Scotland or Ireland where their grass has more nutrients. Joe did a carbless month on the carnivore diet and felt great, lost weight, had great energy, but he got bored and he wanted other foods. That was Joe 1469. If you have any comments that you think I should change my act up a little bit, please let me know. This is my first time, so I'm going to see how it goes. Take care, guys. Have a great day.